Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to show you how you can draw a realistic looking lion's eye. So before we get started on this tutorial, the full real-time version is available on my Patreon page. The link is in the description below and as a card up above. And all the materials that I've used throughout this tutorial are listed in the description below, and there's links to where you can find them as well on Amazon. So let's begin this tutorial. I've just used a soft graphite pencil, and one thing that you really want to make sure that you do is get an accurate outline. So get as accurate an outline as you can as possible. Then what I've done is just lightly erased using a Tombow monoplastic eraser, so I'm using the round tipped one. And then I've taken a Polychromos dark sepia pencil and I'm just gently outlining all of those parts that I've erased. So I've erased the very outer edge of the eye and I've erased the iris line as well. So I'm just going back in and adding those parts back in with the dark sepia. I do this because if you was to leave the graphite down, sometimes when you're layering, especially if you're using a solvent or something, it can muddy the colours, and also if you've got graphite underneath you can get quite a harsh shine from where the graphite's sitting underneath. So I just erase that and then go over with a dark pencil. So you can use any kind of dark pencil that you would like, but I'm using the dark sepia because that's my preferred pencil of choice. After I've done that, I'm just adding in some of the water lines. So these are the really shiny parts of the lion's eye or any eye that you're drawing. And I'm using an Albrecht Dürer watercolour pencil for this. So I'm using the white and I'm just lining underneath where I've done that dark sepia on the bottom lid of the eye. I'm also adding a few specks of this throughout the iris as well, so where I can see those highlights on the reference photo, that's where I'm adding this pencil. I add this down as it kind of acts like a bit of a resist when you're adding your colours back over the top. So with the white pencil I'm pushing quite hard, and then when I'm going over with subsequent colours it kind of avoids the area, so it kind of acts like a wax crayon if you've ever used that and watercolour. Then what I'm doing is going over with some of my base colours. So to begin with, what I'm doing is shading around the actual iris. So I'm shading the lids and the socket first. So I've used an olive brown 10% and then I'm going over with a brown Pablo pencil. So I'm using a mixture of Polychromos, Luminance and Pablo pencils on this piece. These pencils work really well together. So I've added down the base layer of the olive brown, just using light layers to begin with, then gone over with the Pablo brown, and then I'm just adding in some Prussian blue. So I'm mixing the brown and the blue colour to create a really nice dark tone. I prefer to use this method of creating a dark tone rather than going in directly with, say, a black pencil. If you go directly in with a black pencil, it tends to just look quite flat and monotone. So if you're mixing colours yourself, it brings a sort of vibrancy to your piece. So to make a nice dark sort of almost black colour, you want to mix a brown with a blue. You can also mix walnut brown in the Polychromos, and you can mix Delft blue or indigo blue or dark indigo from the Polychromos as well to make the same sort of tone. Once I've made that first initial dark tone, I'm then going over with the dark sepia pencil just to help darken it up. Again, this just adds a little bit of an extra depth to the area. So I'm just following my reference photo and just adding in all of these dark areas on the lower lid where necessary. So I'm just looking at the reference, seeing where these need to go, just adjusting here and there, making things darker or lighter where necessary. I'm then going in with a luminance pencil to add a little bit of a blue tone to that waterline. So here I'm using the light cobalt blue from the Caran d'Ache Luminance and just toning up the waterline, just adding a little bit of a blue tint to that. I also add a little bit of the Prussian blue to this as well. So toning up your waterlines will help to blend everything together. If you're looking at a reference picture and it's got a really bright highlight, I recommend that you add in the waterlines using the white pencil and then tone it, and then you can go back over with a white pencil or a white gel pen, which is what I'm using in this example. I use a white gel pen right at the very end just to add those really bright highlights back into the waterline of the eye. So once we've done the lower lid and got all of those nice shiny areas in, I'm then concentrating on just getting the general shape of the eye of the upper eyelid. So again, I'm using my dark sepia pencil just to add in those darkest tones to begin with. I'm just using the dark sepia to just map everything out, get everything 100% correct. It's always helpful to follow a reference photo if you can. That's really important for realism work. You always want to make sure that you're following a reference photo. Just so you can get all of your shadows and highlights and everything in the right place. It just helps to follow the reference photo if you're wanting that exact realism. If you're just plucking something out of your head, sometimes you don't get the shadows or the highlights quite right and it can look unrealistic. So that's why I always recommend to follow your reference photo. So to do the upper lid, what we've done is just continued the same practice as what we did for the bottom. We've gone in with light layers with dark sepia, then gone over with some Prussian blue and also just added a little bit of the Pablo brown in there as well, just to tone everything up, get everything to the same sort of tone as we have done with the bottom lid. It's always important to keep your pencils really, really sharp, especially if you're working on something quite small, because if you have a sharp pencil you can get in those really small details. If your pencils are quite blunt, you often find that the pencil lay down on the paper is quite uneven as well, so always make sure that you maintain a sharp point with your pencils. So I'm now starting to tone the actual iris of the lion's eye, and we've just gone in with some Pablo cream to begin with. Then we start to layer some colours into the iris, so I've added the Pablo cream as a base layer, then I've gone in with some light flesh, and then I'm going in with some orangish yellow from the Pablos as well. And I'm just using light layers once again, just building up the tone to try and create a really nice rich orange tone. I then start to map out some of the shapes around the highlights that you can see reflected in my particular eye, and for this I'm using a Polychromos pencil just to map those out. So in the eye you can see some of the upper eyelashes reflected and obviously whatever the lion is looking at in its surroundings. So in my example I've got quite a bright blue highlight, so that's what I'm just mapping out with the pencil. You can see those lines on the left hand side up there. And then starting to tone the very bottom edge of the iris, I'm just using some beige from the Pablo pencils just to add a little bit of shadow down the bottom there. And on the top of the iris we're continuing to add that really nice orange rich colour with the orangish yellow as one of the base layers. So when I'm adding the layers down into the iris, I'm trying to keep my pencil marks quite small. I'm going back and forth and also going back over and making a circular motion with my pencil as well. So using circular motions and back and forth motions enables you to cover as much of the surface of the paper as you possibly can. So I started to map out the bottom of the pupil as well, again just using the dark sepia pencil, and we're continuing to shade the iris by using some luminance colours. So I'm using the brown ochre 50% to continue to build up the tone here. So just again using small circular motions, going back and forth, trying to make sure that I blend everything as well. One thing that I like to do when I'm drawing eyes is actually make small lines coming out from the pupil and going round. So what you want to do is make small lines coming from the pupil and continue round in 360 degrees. So you want to make the lines come from the middle of the pupil out towards the outer edge of the eye. And that just gives your iris that liney look. If you look in depth at a zoomed in picture of an eye, you can see lines coming from the centre of the eye. That's what I'm trying to replicate here. So on the top of the eye I've just added a layer of the Pablo brown, and then I'm continuing around to the eye just using some Van Dyke brown from the Pablos to add some of these lines back in. So I'm trying to create the reflection of the eyelashes in the highlight of the eye here. So I just used the Van Dyke Pablo brown to just add in some little reflections of the eyelashes. So a lot of the colour is actually concentrated around the pupil, so I'm trying to get that really nice orange tone just by using a terracotta Polychromos pencil. Again, I'm using back and forth motions and circular motions with my pencil and creating those tiny little lines that you often see in eyes just coming out from the pupil to the outer edge. And I'm just slowly building the colour where necessary. So I'm looking at my reference photo and I'm noting where the darker tones of the eye are. And again, that's mainly on the upper lid where you've got the shadow cast from the eyelashes and around the pupil as well. So I'm concentrating my darker colours more in those sections and trying to keep the other sections free of those really rich orange colours. So to continue the eye, what I've done is added some Pablo orange. And again, I'm just using my Van Dyke Brown Pablo pencil just to add a little bit of texture into the eye. So I'm just shading that bottom lid, trying to create a really nice realistic shadow. And just adding a few specks that you can see, so some of the small details in the eye as well. I'm then using my dark sepia pencil to continue to add those shadow areas and those darker patches within the eye. I'm trying to get the top part of the iris really dark where you've got a really dark shadow overcast there. So once I've done that, then it's time to turn the attention to the highlight of the eye. And as I mentioned, the highlight of my eye is actually quite blue, where the sky is reflected in my reference picture. So I'm going back in with that luminance pencil of the light cobalt blue and just starting to add a little bit of blue tone to that. I'm also using a little bit of Delft blue just to add that really sort of darkish, sort of almost purpley blue tone into the eye there. And I'm shading it where necessary with the dark sepia pencil from the Polychromos, just adding in as much shadow and as blue as possible. I'm then burnishing everything out by using pressure on my pencil with a bluish pale Pablo pencil. That's just to help smooth everything out, make it really nice and reflective and give it that shiny wet look. I'm also using the light violet from the Polychromos just to add a little bit of purple tint in there, and again burnishing with my pencil to try and smooth everything out, trying to get everything look nice and glassy and glossy. So to add some final rich colours to the eye, I'm just using the vermilion red from the Pablos and continuing adding some terracotta down as well from the Polychromos, just to try and really hype up the contrast between those darker areas in the iris and the lighter areas. So you can see on the bottom part of the iris is actually quite peachy toned, where I haven't added any of those orange or red colours, and then towards the middle and upper of the iris it becomes a lot darker and richer. You've got those really rich orange tones in there. So I'm continuing to darken the reflection up, just adding anything of detail that I can see in my reference photo to my drawing. So I'm using the dark sepia pencil again to add some eyelashes, and there's some sort of bars or apparatus reflected in the lion's eye, so I've just added that with the dark sepia pencil as well, and then toning it with the Prussian blue as well, just to try and blend everything together. I want to create a really nice blend and not have anything too stark and in your face. I add a little bit of pink to the iris as well, just to help to tone it up. Gives it a really nice effect, just adding that tiny little hint of pink into that lighter area. I then go back in with my Albrecht Dürer white pencil, and I use this to really pick out some of the really bright, vibrant highlight areas. This doesn't quite cut it though, so I have to go back in with my white gel pen. So I'm using the Uniball Signo gel pen, and I just use this very, very lightly to add a few specks of white. So I add a little bit of contrast where you've got those eyelashes reflected on the eye, just going in and separating those reflected eyelashes a little bit. And as I mentioned, going into the waterline, just adding those really bright highlights. So now I'm just using the Pablo brown pencil. I'm adding in some of the details that you can see in the eye, so that running through the lion's iris we have these really dark brown lines and speckles. So I'm just using a really sharp Pablo brown pencil to add those in, and then toning them where necessary with the dark sepia as well. So I'm continuing with these colours just to make sure that I've got everything right, just checking all of my contrasts and the values within the eye, making sure everything's as dark as it needs to be and everything's as light as it needs to be. I find that when you're drawing eyes or anything that has a great difference between light and dark, that when you start to add those lighter areas, the darker areas actually become lighter as well. So you need to constantly readjust your values, continually check the contrasts of your drawing. So just toning the waterline again once more as well, and just using the gel pen to add a few of those really light highlights back in there. You can use alternatives to a gel pen. You can use some brush and pencil titanium white mixture. You can also try and add it back in with just your white pencil, so you can try and continually put pressure in the same point to get that white colour down onto your darker colour. It takes a little bit of practice, but you can do it if you don't want to use any sort of other methods other than coloured pencil. So that's pretty much it for this tutorial. Hopefully you found this useful and can apply some of these techniques, colours or tips to your own work. If you have any suggestions on future tutorials or anything that you would like me to add to my channel, then leave me a comment down below. I'm always open to new ideas and what you guys would like me to create. If you haven't done so already, then please subscribe to my channel and hit that bell icon to be notified of all future videos as soon as they're released. Don't forget to follow me on all of my social media sites. I'm on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!